the 1994 AIDS conference, BC AIDS conference, that there were a few issues that were coming up, and the voices of youth were coming out. It was really clear that there was a sort of a critical mass building, an energy building around that. We needed a better response for youth. At that time, I was young, and they were young, and I think we were looking for a voice for young people in the HIV movement. Those 5 folks got together and started YouthCo. Petra Fisher, Stephanie Williams, Greg Eads, Patrick McIntyre, and Marcus Greatheart. So they had been involved in various ways, whether volunteering at AIDS Vancouver or sort of involved in some of the other AIDS organizations at the time. The perceived safety, sort of emotional and to some degree physical safety of young people who are newly diagnosed with HIV going into an AIDS service organization that was really reflecting like a much older crowd. And then there was also, I think, some, there were a number of experiences that people were recounting of young guys going in there and sort of coming into like a really sexualized gay culture and feeling really uncomfortable in there, especially as they were dealing with HIV and a new infection. I think there was also the issue of peer youth leaders, and where were the youth leaders, and how could we create youth leaders, and if adult organizations weren't going to do it, then youth had to do it themselves. YouthCo was formed in 1994. It was really volunteer-driven. There was only one staff person at the time, Chris Buckner, and then volunteers, just oodles of volunteers. And in the early days, AIDS Vancouver provided them support. So they helped with a bit of financing, a loan, and they negotiated with AIDS Vancouver also that their speakers bureau, specifically the one that the program at AIDS Vancouver that used to send volunteers into schools, for that to shift over to YouthCo. So AIDS Vancouver was very supportive at the time, I think, of the formation of YouthCo, and I think that was specifically Rick Marchand, really recognizing the importance of nurturing new leadership and youth voices in the movement.
When I was 15 years old, I was living in a small town called Powell River, which is on the Sunshine Coast, just north of the Sunshine Coast. Growing up in Powell River, for me at that time, heading into my teens, I felt like the town was pretty isolated. I definitely felt isolated living there, and I think that I felt like it was a pretty ignorant place for me at that time. The transition from elementary school and middle school into high school was really hard for me. I felt really lost in a lot of ways. I was really disengaged with school. I didn't like it. But I remember hearing something about the fact that there was going to be this training around HIV and AIDS. HIV and AIDS was something that we had heard about. It was, 94 was when the Real World San Francisco happened, and Pedro Zamora was on the Real World and also died that year. It was also the year that Tom Hanks won the Academy Award for Philadelphia. So it was becoming a little bit more mainstream, but at the same time, living in a small town where I lived, which was so isolated and not having anything remotely like empowered sexual health information, it was still a very scary topic as well. Going to this training that was hosted by YouthCo just completely changed my world. It just kind of blew everything that I knew. I knew there was something else that I needed. I didn't know exactly what it was, and I found so much of it at that training. I met young people that were queer, that were openly gay, that were openly queer. I met people who were HIV positive. I met people who were unafraid to discuss things like sexuality, which was not really talked about at all. It was such an incredibly safe and nurturing space to be in. I found a new sense of purpose and enthusiasm, and I took that back to my town with me. The day that I graduated, I was on the first bus to Vancouver. I had stayed in touch with YouthCo, although the work that I was doing as a peer educator in Powell River was kind of separate. And I jumped right back into the Speakers Bureau, doing speaks whenever I could. There was a video project contract to do the first 2 videos that YouthCo was going to do that were peer education videos on hepatitis C. And that was my first paid work with YouthCo.
And they start doing the IV drugs. After a couple years, you got to think about how many times you've been shooting drugs and how much less you're caring about it every time and how less careful you're being about it every time.
When I began working for YouthCo as part of the organization, I really saw how the organization worked from the inside out. I really learned, and not just learned, but I think absorbed with all of my being, the integrity of how YouthCo was set up, and how it was set up, and the original intention of the founders, which was to set up an organization that was for youth, by youth. And that sounds easy, like it's like this nice catchphrase, for youth, by youth, but it's actually really challenging. And to have an organization where not only are the staff young people, the volunteers young people, which is common, a lot of organizations have that, but that the board of directors, the leadership, every aspect of the organization was young people under the age of 29 and under. And that was a pretty phenomenal thing, and continues to be a pretty phenomenal thing. I think that Vancouver is unique in that there was this acceptance that young people should be at the table and that YouthCo should be at the table. And even though we might be the only young person in the room representing whatever particular issue we were talking about, our experience was valued, and that people really did want to hear what we needed and what we wanted as young people. My time at YouthCo, working within the programs, taught me so much about what can be accomplished when young people are really, truly empowered to speak up for what they need. And not only to speak up for what they need, but to then become responsible for making that happen, for providing that to themselves and to their peers. And I feel incredibly grateful to have had that opportunity. And it really then, for me, became the launching pad into a number of other organizations, being a part of founding several other organizations that really operated on that same mandate of for youth, by youth, and youth-driven. After 9 years with YouthCo, I left, although I didn't go very far at first. I began working with Crystal Clear, which was a project of Vancouver Coastal Health, a youth harm reduction project that continued to partner with YouthCo on some of their initiatives. And from there, it really became a platform for me to begin working internationally in youth and harm reduction. I co-founded Youth Rise with Kyla Zanardi, and Youth Rise was and still is the only international youth-led harm reduction and drug policy organization. It's a network of young people around the world who are actively involved in advocating for harm reduction services and drug policy change. It was with Youth Rise that I became very grateful for the solid foundation that I had in Vancouver, and the not just the belief, but the knowledge. Like, it was a part of my core that I knew that what we were advocating for worked because I'd seen it happen, because I'd seen it in Vancouver. Because of some of what we learned, what I learned, and was able to bring forward into my work internationally, also then led to the development of other youth-led organizations around the world. So now we don't just have examples from Vancouver, we also have examples from Nepal and from Nigeria and from Ukraine. And we have examples of young people who are coming together and at times risking jail or risking persecution, but really knowing and believing and feeling the support of young people around the world that they do have a right to be active participants in their own health and to demand what they need in order to be healthy and happy and to continue to grow. And I think that is really incredible, and I am very honored and happy to have been a part of developing something that has provided those opportunities to other young people. If I were to pick a pivotal moment in my life, it would probably be about 15 years ago when I first walked into a YouthCo core training, because it really did shift my world. And then I think about other people, young people at the time who aren't so young anymore, but who also had that experience of being a part of YouthCo. And I think that it's a testament to the work that YouthCo does and did, and the vision of the people that helped set up YouthCo, that there's a lot of real leaders within our community and in our movement who were a part of YouthCo. Some notable leaders in our community who were working in the HIV and AIDS field being Evan Jones, Philip Banks, Sheena Sargent, Chris Buckner, and of course the producers of this campaign, who are all proud alumni of YouthCo.